Hi, Glenn here. Some time ago now, it was in social media, it was on Twitter. It will always be Twitter, I will not call it X. Someone who I don't know commented on a post that was about men's mental health, and she said something along the lines of, why are we being asked to care about men's mental health? Men get everything. Now, I'm not going to say anything about what men get or don't get, but I am going to say something about the importance of men's mental health, whether or not it is an important thing. I mentioned at the start of this channel that it might be natural to think that because I'm a man, when I talk about issues of mental health and well-being, they might connect better with issues of men's mental health. Although I do hope that many of the things, or at least some of the things I say, will be useful to everyone, whether they're male or female. I have this view that it's really hard to discern our motives. It's a view that I think about a lot. Maybe one day I'll write a book about it, but I do have this view. And so when it comes to the question of what it is that makes me think men's mental health is important, it's difficult to say. I mean, who knows? Maybe it is just the fact that I'm a man. Maybe that's what's driving it. But I really think that there are reasons to think that men's mental health is an important subject in which all of us should take some interest. I should say that I don't set out in this channel, and I will not set out in this channel intentionally to court controversy. I only want to say things that I really think will be helpful. But given what I'm going to be talking about in this video, I know it's possible that depending on who watches it, some people may consider it to be controversial. That's unfortunate in my view. I really don't think that it should be controversial, but it might be. And it's also not a channel where I will get right down into the dense intellectual weeds and talk about research in published literature. I do that elsewhere in other forums, but not here. Here, I talk about, how do I describe them? Big, chunky issues that I think are important and make a difference in our lives. And I think men's mental health is a big, important subject. So it's worth having a few naysayers. It's worth generating a little bit of hostility towards me if I can get people on board with that message. I think that's worthwhile. It is an important subject, and I want to tell you a little bit about why I think it's important. It won't be exhaustive, I'm sure. And there are a few reasons, and I find it difficult to rank them in terms of which ones are more important than others. So I'm just going to randomly grab one and start there. So the first reason starts with a question. Does the therapeutic setting work for men? Does therapy as we think of it, professional therapy in the setting that comes into our mind initially, does that work for men? There's this joke in social media about men. Lots of jokes in social media about men, but this one is called "Instead of Going to Therapy," and it's a meme that says men will literally something. You can insert pretty much anything instead of going to therapy. Here are some examples. So the idea is that men will do anything, that will go to ridiculous lengths to avoid going to therapy. And, it's a joke. These memes are meant to be funny. It's a humorous exaggeration, but it's based on a real truth. Men, on average, attend therapy sessions much less often than women do. And when they do, they tend not to go for as long. They drop out much sooner. That's what a quick survey of sources on Google tells me. And it's also what the stereotype is, and it just appears to be true. Now, it might sound like I'm about to go off on a tangent. I'm not. Just bear with me. So, there's this thing called inequity when it comes to healthcare provision. When we read or hear about, say, ethnic groups, that's the example I'm choosing to use, who are underrepresented among those receiving therapy, or even just underrepresented among those who have mental health issues, and so you might think, oh, I guess they're okay. We might hear concerns at that time about the fact that there could be a problem of underdiagnosis. And if these people are not visiting mental health professionals at the same rate, well, we don't know what the state of their mental health really is, and there could be barriers to them accessing mental health services. And those are things that we need to be very wary of, and we should probably try to address those barriers. And when we start talking about those barriers and the fact that people are underrepresented in people who receive and use a service, then the term that we use for that is inequity. These people are subject to inequity when it comes to mental health services. Their needs are not as well provided for as the needs of others. So there's one issue. Another issue that I'm just going to throw out there, you'll see shortly why this is relevant, is the issue of cultural competence in healthcare provision, and in this case in mental healthcare provision. Something that you'll hear about if you undertake formal study in counselling or psychology, or I guess healthcare more broadly, is we need to be culturally competent when we are dealing directly with whoever our client happens to be. And that's usually discussed in terms of people who are associated with a culture that involves, say, ethnicity, or where they are from geographically, or what language they might speak, or what religion they might be, or the sorts of beliefs that are typical of people from that culture, and so on. The idea is that you have to be able to work with those people in a way that is supportive of their cultural values, a way that doesn't, grate against the person that you're trying to help, and so on. And we might sometimes hear the concern that people in certain cultures might not have their mental health needs met as well as others, and that's because there are not enough culturally competent, there's that crucial term, mental health practitioners out there. And that's certainly a worthwhile concern. Now notice what we don't hear about these scenarios. We don't hear that ethnic or cultural minorities should go to therapy, and if it seems like there are factors that could get in the way of their therapy, or what's on offer doesn't work for them, then they should just get over themselves. They should get with the program. They should take what's offered to them. Can you imagine, if a public science communicator said that, they would be crucified. We don't say that we don't need therapy that is made available in different ways or formats to meet them where they are at. They need to fit themselves into my mold and meet the therapy that I offer where it is at. Imagine how ridiculous you would sound if you said that. Now, otherwise, this person might go on to say, it's their own fault if they experience mental health problems that are not properly addressed. We never say that. But the way that so many in our society, even, and this should be shocking, even people who are public communicators about mental health issues, the way that they explain away the fact that men don't engage with mental health services is very disappointing to those of us who actually want to see better mental health outcomes for men. We're told by some that the problem is toxic masculinity. This is what we're told. We're told that men buy into the stereotype that they have to be tough, and getting help with mental health services is weakness, and so men don't want to do it. Men, we are told, believe that when you're having a hard time, you just need to man up. That's a phrase that you hear a lot when talking about this issue. Men are, we are told, bad at verbalizing their feelings, so they avoid doing so in a way that talking with a mental health professional would require. And when you see, if you were to see a paragraph that had all these descriptions packed densely together, it would be obvious, or at least I think it should be obvious, that this is a kind of victim blaming that we don't do to any of these other groups who are not having their mental health provided for with services that work for them. It promotes, in some cases anyway, the worst caricatures of men as these inarticulate, knuckle-dragging meatheads. Their toxicity is the problem. It's certainly not. We could never think that it is the services on offer that aren't more suited or that aren't appropriately suited to their needs. Imagine if we heard mental health professionals suggesting anything like this about ethnic groups. Again, it's just an easy example to use, that tend not to take part in Western therapy. They would be raked across the coals for that attitude. The other day, I indulged my wife in listening to an audiobook of hers. She didn't write it. These are not her words that I'm about to talk about. While we were driving, she said, "Would you like to listen to this? You might find it interesting, given you're interested in psychology." So, sure, we put it on. And the book was by a therapist. I won't say who. But he's someone whose techniques and practices are implemented in a number of health centres here in New Zealand. And at one point he said, "Something I get my clients to do in my office is to cover their eyes with their hands, and then I ask them, 'What can you see?' And this little physical exercise that he was describing goes on for a while. I don't recall all the details, but the client moves their hands further away from their eyes, and the therapist then asks them more about what they can see now, and then they use this as an analogy for something in their lives. Again, I forget exactly what the details were, but I thought to myself, really? I mean, you designed this exercise and you thought, yeah, for sure, a normal grown-up man will definitely do this and be okay with it. And these are actually people, I gather, who might think that a man who doesn't want to take part in exercises like this in front of a therapist is a man who is just too macho, not willing to open up. No, he's not. He just doesn't want to be treated like a child. Now, look, I realize that this is not, as a rule, what therapy is like. This is just an example that stood out to me. And yeah, I'm sure that there are plenty of women who would feel similarly about little exercises like this that a therapist might get them to do. It just struck me as a case of somebody being so oblivious about the service they were providing and who it might be appropriate for. Setting aside examples like that, what if it is true that regular, substantial sessions of talking therapy of the sort that are currently offered and that we naturally think of when we think of a therapist talking with a client, what if those things don't work as well for men as they do for women? What if that's true? Suppose that's true. If it is true, should we then say, well, that's somehow men's fault? Or it's a product of men's deficiencies and vices. That's why it doesn't work for them. Or should we say, as we probably would for any other group, that maybe the problem might exist in the approach, and we need to engage ways of improving men's mental health that actually work better for men. Unfortunately, there is still too much of the former going on. Those awful descriptions that I was reading earlier about why men don't take part in professional mental health services, they're current. I read that off a website just a couple of days ago. But there are some people now starting to pay more attention and to talk more about the latter. So we need to think about not what's wrong with men to make this mismatch the case, but how men's mental health might be better addressed. Things are improving. There are people doing that, placing emphasis on physical health, social networks, lifestyle, hobbies, diet, education, and so on. And some of the people making the difference are even willing to talk about the whole person and say that spiritual well-being is important as well. And also, just as a caveat to this, please don't hear me as saying that men never need to go to talking therapy. It may be very useful in many cases. So that's not quite the point that I've been making here. Secondly, outcomes. Outcomes, and by that I mean ultimate outcomes. What are the differences in the state of our mental health for males and females? What are the differences? And the answer to that question is that it might actually be quite hard to say overall. Women and girls, more often than men and boys, present to healthcare providers, and that part is important, with anxiety or depression. They more often are discovered to have engaged in self-harming behavior, and they are more often seen because of suicide attempts. And there's a lot to say about that, and not everyone is aware of that. There is a lot to say about that. I mean, for one thing, if the therapeutic context doesn't work for men, or if for any other reason men are less likely to approach a professional about their mental health issues, which is what is the case. I mean, people complain about it, people joke about it, we know it's true. But if it is true, then we've got a real problem of underreporting, right? By trade, during the day, I'm a data analyst, and I've got a lot of experience in data analysis and reporting, and I would find that frustrating because we kind of just don't know. Now, the answer to the question of how many men struggle with mental health issues compared with women is we don't know. We don't know. But one reason just at this point that men's mental health matters is that for men, far more often than for women, the mental burdens that they bear end with a man taking his own life. We know that. And it's not a small difference when it comes to comparing the suicide rates for males and females. The rate is more than double. These are New Zealand numbers, but in the year ending June 2023, the rate of suspected suicides in New Zealand for females was 6 deaths per 100,000 females in the population, which is still too high, obviously. We would much rather that there were none, but there were 6. For males, it was a bit more than 15 per 100,000 males. So double would have been 12, but it was more than 15. It was 15 point something. Suicide attempts are a tricky thing to talk about, partly because they're just awful, obviously. But also, there's this cliche that a suicide attempt is a cry for help. I mean, it's unhelpful because it's very often just totally false. Very often. But it's sometimes true. And it's not always easy to know when it's true and when it's not true. But if it is ever true, it's much less likely to be true in the case of a man or a young man. He's not crying for help. He intends to die, and he will probably succeed. The ways, and we don't need to go into the details of this, but the ways that men go about it show a far greater degree of determination to kill themselves. So that's a reason, I think it's a huge reason, to think that men's mental health is important. They are more likely to die because of poor mental health. I mean, you'd have to be inhumane not to think that matters. And if it's coming to that for so many men, then we probably can't rely on the statistics about the frequency of mental health issues to say with any authority what the state of men's mental health is like. We know that there are issues flying under the radar and they can be fatal. Thirdly, social attitudes to men and men's mental health. Now, often you'll hear about social attitudes to men's mental health, and it's because you are presented with descriptions of men who don't want to get help with their mental health, or they have a toughen up attitude to the issues that they face. And so the unhelpful social attitudes that you're encouraged to acknowledge are the attitudes of the men who have mental health issues. They are the ones who are making things worse, you might be encouraged to think. And look, no doubt in some cases that's going to be true, because people are what they are, unfortunately. That's not the sort of social attitude that I want to highlight here. There exists a profoundly toxic attitude to men's well-being and mental health in some subcultures, especially, and here it comes, not trying to stir the pot, but this is what I observe, especially among some women who might describe themselves, rightly or otherwise, as feminists, particularly in online spaces, and I know that that can be the worst, although in offline places as well. And you might not like that characterization. There might be people objecting already, saying that people who do this, and you'll see what this amounts to shortly, people who do this are not pure feminists, they're not real feminists, they're not very good feminists, and that actually doesn't matter. This is not a critique of feminism. The point is, this is a real phenomenon. Like, it actually happens. No matter what you think of what is said by the people who do this, this really happens. And it's not exclusively women, don't get me wrong. People like this have some useful male allies as well. Dunking on men, especially white men, especially white, straight, cisgender men, is a kind of pastime for some people. It's, as I look at some social media forums, it seems to be what some people do with half their life. I think, like, are you on work time doing this? Is this how you spend your whole evening? And maybe they think that what they're doing is, I don't know, fighting back, pursuing social justice, being awake to systems of oppression or something else. Look, people can be pretty inventive when it comes to justifying their venom. And dunking on men because of their mental health issues is just a variety of this. And there's a strange, and this is what bothers me the most, there is a strange and I think very troubling, or it should be very troubling, sort of social acceptability of this behavior in our culture. Certainly more so than the acceptability of antisocial or hateful conduct of men towards women. Now, while I'm offering these descriptions, some of you may be sitting there saying, what are you talking about? Maybe you haven't seen this. You don't inhabit these online spaces, so you don't know what I mean. And I suppose for that you are somewhat blessed, although perhaps a bit sheltered. You also might have heard some men talk about this, and maybe, although I hope not, you've written them off as trying to falsely claim that men face hate as well, so that men can have something to complain about. So I'm going to show you a sample of the sorts of things that I mean. And I cannot stress enough what a small sample this is, or how normal this behavior seems to be in some crowds. Take a look. I observe this kind of thing a lot, but it doesn't have an effect on me other than to underline in my mind the fact that there's a real problem here, a serious social problem. This sort of content really is harmful to a lot of people. It reinforces a culture of dismissing or even weaponizing the mental health issues, in some cases the fairly serious mental health issues that many men do face, and it perpetuates an extremely harmful conflict that just sees people doubling down on opposite ends of hateful engagement online, and sometimes it spreads offline as well, and then it gets even more serious. In particular, the sorts of men who are demeaned as being incels and having serious issues with women and with themselves are reassured by material like this that women and the world hate them, that nobody cares about their troubles, that they are what is wrong with the world, that they are less than human, and we would all be better off if they didn't exist. Now, I mean, who is there for men who are in that position? You know, is there anyone who would take their side or be in their corner when that kind of thing is going on? Or just men generally who carry burdens and responsibilities, who may have uncertainties about the direction in which their life should go, who rarely or never encounter any encouragement or appreciation, but who, on the contrary, on a daily basis, see this sort of venom directed at them, about how they are the devil incarnate. And wouldn't it be great if they died? If I'd said that to some of you without seeing those tweets, those posts that I shared, would you even believe that that kind of thing is common? I guess you would, because I mean, you know what humans can be like, but some people would find that unbelievable. You might say, oh, men are told that we wish that they were dead, and you would say, come on, you're exaggerating. No, I'm not. No, not even close. It's all the more despicable that this is going on because we know that in at least some cases, these men who are made to feel that the world would be better off without them go on to remove themselves from the world. They kill themselves. How could any of this be tolerable in a situation like that? Now, I don't fancy our chances of eradicating such hateful and harmful attitudes altogether, any more than I think we're going to eradicate racism, for example. I mean, good luck. But at the very least, I think there should be some loud alarm bells going off, much louder than there are, about the fact that this sort of culture is flourishing online to a greater extent than I think people realize when it comes to the specific ways that people are talking about men. It really does, all by itself, count as a reason to go into bat for men's mental health. The fact that this is so acceptable to so many people is a reason to care more about men's mental well-being and to encourage men positively to do things that will better themselves in the face of whatever it is they're dealing with. Lastly, number 4, help the men help everyone else. What do I mean by that? Now, I'm sure there are more reasons, but this is the last one that I'm going to talk about. If you help men with their mental health, you're going to help everyone. And here's why I say that. I'm going to give you an example that's not related to mental health, because that can be helpful, hopefully. So there's evidence that in married couples who have a religious affiliation, women are more often more devout by a number of measures, and yet there is also evidence that it is a practice of fathers that have a far greater influence on whether or not the children will continue in their religious belief. So if dad doesn't regularly attend church, the children won't, regardless of mum's devotion. If dad does, then the children are at least more likely to. And so I've heard pastors who are talking about evangelism strategies, and they say things like, if you get the men, you get everyone. And there's a real truth to that. It's a generalization, obviously, and it doesn't tell us what will happen in any given case. But the point is, whether explicitly or not, men have influence on those close to them that women don't. You might have heard the expression, "she is not your therapy." It was a thing a few years back, actually, and you could buy it on t-shirts, and the slogan meant that men should not treat their significant other as their therapy. They should sort themselves out instead of taking their issues out on their wives or their girlfriends. Now, okay, so never mind just now the potentially unhelpful suggestions that might make about a sort of angels and devils views of women and men in relationships. That would be a real misrepresentation. But it does at least acknowledge one thing, and that is the well-being of men makes a huge difference to the relationships and families of which they are a part, and the well-being of the other people who are involved in those. Now, of course, that is true of women as well, but I put it to you that it is more true of men because of the influence that they have. If you're a bit more cynical, you might say because of the dominance and power that they have. I don't put it that way, but whatever works for you. And it includes the potential to do great good or great harm. And it's not just in relationships and families, in the corporate world too. So in the public sector in New Zealand, I don't know what it's like in other countries, women outnumber men on the executive boards of large organizations in the public sector. But that's because of intentional policy decisions deliberately making sure that women get into those positions. So in a way, it's a situation that's forced. Outside of the public sector, where there are no such policies, men hugely outnumber women on executive boards. I think I checked recently, and men make up well over 80%. Most CEOs are men. Far more self-employed tradespeople are men than women. In religions, by far most leaders are male. Now you might sit there looking at this and going, yeah, well, that shouldn't be the case. But just now, I'm not even interested in what should be the case. I'm just talking about the way that the world is. This is true, whether I like it or you like it or not. And given that this is the case, widespread problems with men's mental health create big ripples that we really don't want. Do you want to have a boss who is afflicted by depression and subject to outbursts? Do you want a tradesman who isn't being helped with his social anxiety? That could be a problem. Do you want a husband who carries the lion's share of materially providing for you, who has nowhere to turn when he doesn't feel adequate to meet the pressures of work and his responsibilities to you and the family? Nowhere to turn other than a bottle or an early grave. Is that what you want? Or goodness knows what sort of escapism and misbehavior. Do we want church ministers who are struggling with PTSD, who are asked to offer guidance to others but who can't get on top of their own trauma? Do we want police officers who have got anger issues? Right? Whether anyone likes it or not, the stakes for everyone are higher if men's mental health is not looked after. That's just true. Even if for some reason you don't like men, that's true. Actually, that reminds me of a situation on a talk show. I forget the name of the talk show, but it's the talk show hosted by Bill Maher. And there was a guest, don't remember who the guest was, but it was shortly after Donald Trump first became the president of the United States, and a lot of people were really shocked or upset about this. And I don't know that this person was a fan of Donald Trump, but he was saying some things about being supportive of him, and the host said, "Really? You support him?" And the guy said, "Well, look, let me put it this way. This is a country. Let's think of the country like an airplane. We're all on the airplane together, and if we're all on an airplane, then I support the pilot, right? Because if something goes wrong with the pilot, we're all in big trouble. Well, like it or not, but in many situations in society, men are the pilots, and if things go very badly for them, then that has consequences. So, those are 4 reasons. It's not just because I know what it's like to deal with men's mental health issues, although I do. It's not just because I'm on Team Man, because I am one, although, yeah, okay, that's probably part of it. There are good reasons to say that men's mental health as an issue in itself matters. Let's recap. Number 1, in some ways there is an unmet need where what's on offer doesn't connect with men who need help with mental health issues. That's a big issue, and I definitely haven't done it justice here. I've just acknowledged that it's a thing. We need different and better approaches to addressing men's mental health issues, so we need to care about men's mental health. Number 2, the outcome of poor mental health that many men face is just devastating. It's worse than it is for women. It is literally killing them. Number 3, there's a terrible set of social attitudes to men and their mental health that is hardly even acknowledged at a mainstream level, hardly even spoken about, and which is punching down on men who already have a hard enough time with their lives. And lastly, if we do start better addressing men's mental health and well-being, it will be good for everyone and not just for men. So, there might be more reasons, but look, I've given you 4, and I think they are enough. So you've watched all the way through to the end of the video, and for that, thank you. I appreciate that so much. I would love to make this channel occupy a larger part of my life, and you're helping me do that just by watching the content. There are other things that you could do as well that I would appreciate so much. If you haven't subscribed already, please do. That would really give me a boost and make this more possible for me. If you did find the video provocative, interesting, maybe useful, then look, I would encourage you to share it with others on whatever social media platform you use. Just share a link and say, hey, see what you think. This is maybe useful, maybe not, maybe hey, there's a video by this crazy guy. Come and listen to what he has to say. But that would be most appreciated and most helpful for me. I'll be back before too long with I'll probably be talking about this table that I sat at while I was speaking. That's the project that's currently on my workbench. Until then.